Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project with me, Chris Akers. And on this podcast, we talk about arts, culture, politics, sport, and everything else in between. And it's the in-between, really, that I want to discuss with you. I'm here with Liam Walsh, who's written a very excellent book, really, called Red Balloons. So it's really sobering read, and it's really celebratory read as well. I'm really delighted to have him on. Hello, Liam.
Good evening, Chris. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, likewise. Before we get into the depths of the book, like I do with every guest, can you just say who you are, what do you do, and how you came to be writing this book?
Well, I live in Witney in West Oxfordshire with my family. It's my hometown, so I know the area, know the people, know everything around me very, very well, of course. In terms of where the book comes from, where I come from, really had a lifelong interest in all sports, but football in particular. Football was something that bound our family together very tightly. The story of the book follows our family following Swindon Town in particular. And unfortunately, through the course of our journey over the last few years, I lost my son Patrick at 15 suddenly, and then my dad very shortly after. So the book really is my way of both remembering them, telling their stories, and really just pulling all of that together as to how we've coped and how life has been ever since, really.
Okay. So before we delve into, obviously, the death of your son and your father, you talked about supporting Swindon Town, and it's interesting because even before we get to what we're going to get to later, there's a lot of highs and lows in that in particular.
A lot of lows, Chris, yeah.
Yeah, quite a few. So from promotion to the top flight to relegation again because of financial irregularity.
Yeah.
Just probably most fans, especially the lower leagues, will say it would probably, I imagine, have a similar answer. But what has it been like supporting them, not the highs and lows, supporting them over the years? Because it must have been quite a roller coaster, especially in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a roller coaster, and in fact, with the new season just about upon us, I've got my fingers and thumbs out over the weekend, and it's during the course of the season it'll be 50 years for me. So that puts a bit of an age on me as well in terms of how long I've been going, and I think I've been every season along the way. So most fans of certainly lower league clubs appreciate that there's. In terms of on the pitch, there are a lot of you'd say lows, a lot of mediocre times. A lot of the time, it's quite dull, to be honest, Chris. But equally, the highs therefore become, I think, even more special. And as I've tried to tell really through the story in the book, there's a lot more than football that binds us all together, and there's a lot more than football that's important at the end of the day or at the end of the week. But football there is part of that central, essence of who we are and what we enjoy doing. And along the way, as a Swindon fan, huge roller coasters at times. But equally, sometimes there are seasons and years where not a great deal of interest happens, and I can only speak from what I know rather than what it'd be like to be a fan of one of the big clubs where you're tottering off down to Wembley or watching your team in Europe every month. So no, it's a different existence. I'm sure it's one that's common to fans of certainly most teams, most lower league fans, and probably, in all honesty, most fans outside the top 5 or 6 clubs as well.
So part of our enjoyment, I imagine, would have been going with your sons to Swindon as well. How did they take it to experience, and was football their main sport, or was it just one of many that they enjoyed when they were young?
Yeah, it was the main one, but equally one of others as well. And what I did was really replicate with my children what I'd done with my or what my dad and my mum had done with me as well. So football was always a family activity in that sense. They all had different introductions and sort of different life cycles of support, I guess. So my daughter's the eldest. When she came, she wasn't terribly interested, other than it was probably a little bit of time away, and sometimes with an evening game it might be a night match and a late night, so she'd quite enjoy that bit. I think there's a story I do tell in the book. I think her supporting was probably complete when we played Millwall at the end of one season, and there were lots of police horses around before the game, keeping people in order. And with a lifelong love of horses for her, she said, "Will they be doing show jumping on the pitch afterwards, Dad?" That was her primary excitement, I think, for being there. And when that wasn't the case, I think she was so disappointed. I'm not sure she's been back since. Middle son came for the first time because I think, again, he was quite young, and there was a chance of we got offered some hospitality tickets, so he took that up, and he was probably a little bit disappointed when he found out that wasn't the usual fare as time went on. But likewise, he became a season ticket holder and still is, and he's followed the club home and away in the same way that I would have done through my childhood and teenage years into the 20s. And then Patrick his first game actually was 2 when Swindon were playing Mansfield towards the end of one season, and it was a game which we could potentially have got promoted at. My wife was away, and I was faced with that dilemma as to, do I miss the game, or do I move heaven and earth, or do I miss the game and look after Patrick at home, or do I move heaven and earth to be at the game, which would involve taking him? So I went through all the planning and preparation as to what I could do to take a 2-year-old to the game for the first time, and made sure I was there, which was an experience that we wouldn't forget either. But, we didn't get promoted that day, but we did not too long after. But it was quite special for him to have gone at such a young age. And after all the worry and the preparation that went into it, in the end, he was most terrified of the mascot as a huge inflated person in a robin was prancing around on the pitch beforehand. That was maybe a part of the experience he wasn't expecting. That was a great introduction for him.
Yeah. So you went to obviously Swindon with your sons. Correct me if I'm wrong, going on a book, you didn't just stop there, because, correct me if I'm wrong, your part of your family's Irish, so you went over to Ireland to watch the Gaelic football, and you went to Croke Park and watched the finals there. What was that like to experience it with your sons, and not just experience their sports, but also go to Ireland and visit family for the first time?
Yeah, well, we've always kept quite a connection with our family in Waterford, which is my dad's home county in Ireland. So I'd always been aware of, I suppose, the Gaelic sports, in particular hurling. So hurling, there's two of the main, certainly the male Gaelic sports are hurling and football. Waterford is a hurling county; they don't play football. So I was aware that there was a great pull in that direction as well, and a bit of a romance in the story that they'd not won the All Ireland Championship since 1959, which is a huge wait when there are illustrious neighbours in Cork and Kilkenny and Tipperary who win it every other year. So Waterford's always had this quite almost a romantic image of the perennial underdogs who never quite achieve on the biggest stage. And there was a point probably in the early 90s, actually, they had a better spell, reached a semi-final or two, and it was one of those things where I could look at my dad, and my dad was looking at me, and we were probably thinking the same thing, and it was a case of, come on, let's go and do it. Let's go and experience this. And that did begin, a voyage really to start with my dad. And Waterford lost every semi-final that we ever went to as well. But once we'd started coming back with our tales and stories and how much we'd enjoyed it, the rest of the family started to tag along a little bit too. So that is something that really did bind us together. And over the last 20 or 30 years, we've experienced again a lot of lows with Waterford, and the wait for the championship goes on. So 1959 is still it's still something that hangs on every shoulder of everyone from the county. But we've had some fantastic days and memories together with the team.
Okay, cool. As I said, this is very celebratory read and very sober read. It's called Red Balloons. Why did you title the book Red Balloons? What was the actual significance of that?
Well, I'd written quite a lot without necessarily thinking that I was writing a book. I'd come through the experience of losing Patrick, losing my dad, going through COVID. Everything was up in the air, as it was for a lot of people too. And then I was probably getting towards the later stages, and one of my friends was writing a book at the same time, and we helped inspire and we probably almost jokingly, in many senses, provoked each other to keep writing. So it was fantastic that we did that together. And he said, I've got a title for my book. What's yours called? And I said, no idea really. And at the same time, I think I would have heard 99 Red Balloons by Nina from the early 1980s on the radio, and something struck me about red balloons and its significance, and it sort of stayed in my head for a little while, Chris. And then I ended up googling I was started thinking this could be a potential, and I googled red balloons, and one of the definitions is that quickly found was red balloons can signify how fragile love and happiness can be, especially the ease with which it is burst. And I thought, wow, that's our story. That's my title. And from that point on, I knew I had to complete the project that I was working on, and I had to call it Red Balloons. So that was that story.
Okay. So now, obviously, we've talked about your family and your like going to events and so on and so forth. So discuss that night when the tragic news happened. So it was your two sons. Correct me if I'm wrong, they went to London, didn't they, to watch a game by themselves? So you can tell me a little bit about that, and then what happened on the way back.
Yeah. So they the two sons had gone to watch Tottenham and Middlesbrough. I think it was a third round FA Cup replay. So it's one of those rare opportunities really to get tickets to go to a fantastic new stadium and do something different away from the humdrum of League Two football. And it was an evening I knew I wasn't able to go. I'd love to have gone as well, but it was a case where they'd started going to Swindon away games on their own, so they'd already been travelling. They were used to travelling together and having their own adventures, which was wonderful to see. So we packed them off in the midst, as it was, of Storm Brendan at the time. So that it was horrific conditions, and as a dad, I'm the one who's worrying about whether they've got a coat that's going to be big enough and warm enough and rainproof and all those sorts of things. That was the extent of my concern, really. Apart from that, my prime feelings were being a little bit envious that they were going out for even out in London and to watch the game at Tottenham. I'd not been to the stadium at the time either, so it was quite intrigued and envious. The game was live on telly. It was not the best game ever, but it was one that I'd kept half an eye on. They texted me at half time with these are the seats that we've got, and they looked fantastic. And you could see Jose Mourinho was manager at the time, and somehow they were sat not too far away from him behind the dugouts. So that all looked good. End of the game came, and then to be honest, my concern was making sure that they were back in central London and back on the train home, because I was going to be picking them up from the station late. It would have been late finish and a late night for me, so I was anxious that they got home and I could pick them up and I could go to bed and be up and on the road for work in the morning. So I was tracking them on by my friends. They got into central London, and once they're in central London, I thought, fantastic, they're on schedule. The 11:10 train back from Marylebone. So I sort of packed my wife Kate off to bed, safe in the knowledge that they were just about back at the station. And at that point, or just after that point, their location froze. So initially, you just think that's a technological glitch. But then I did start to worry as to, they're not back at the station. They're only 5 minutes from the station. What have they stopped for? Which was, just mild concern at that point. I thought, maybe has Patrick got a knee injury, whether he'd fallen over and hurt his knee, probably most likely, and they were just catching their breath before making the way to the train. The time for the train came and went, and they were still in the same place, literally 5 minutes from Marylebone. So my first feeling was a selfish one of being quite annoyed, I guess, that they weren't on the train, and I'd have to stay up a little bit later for the next train, and even later night. But also starting to worry a little bit. And a few minutes later, Kate came back downstairs and was talking to somebody. I couldn't fathom who she was talking to. And I heard there's a voice at the other end of the line that said CPR, and I hadn't really got any inkling of what that meant. And the phone call concluded fairly quickly, and Kate just said, we've just got to get in the car and go to Paddington. It was the emergency services, and we need to get down there. We don't know what's happened, but we need to move really, really, really quickly. Which we did, of course, and it was still Storm Brendan was absolutely raging. So it was the most horrific driving journey imaginable. Of clutching the steering wheel, frantic with worry, not talking, in silence. Was just trying to get through the storm, the storm that was around us, as well as the literal storm that was going on and about to unfold. We got to St Mary's Hospital in Paddington. I remember also thinking, I've just parked on, double yellow lines outside the hospital. Can I leave the car here? And so Kate just bundled me out. So don't worry about the car. We've got to get straight in. And we were taken into a room very, very quickly. I can't remember too much of the details then, but my other son was in there with the doctor. And effectively, she just said, "I'm so sorry. We done everything we can, but Patrick's died." So, whilst in a sense, the journey down was quite terrifying, because we didn't know what we could do, or what we would find, or what on earth was happening. Clearly, it's the worst news, the worst outcome that anyone can conceive. So yeah, our world collapsed very, very suddenly just after midnight in Paddington.
Yeah, I remember reading that, what would you describe in the book, and I mean, I'm not a parent, and I'm not going to pretend I know or even know as much. I've lost people in my life who are close to me, but I think the loss of a child is something completely different. Obviously, that's something that you and your wife, that's something that's you created. And I don't even want to ask what were you thinking, because that sounds such a stupid question, but it's like, how, obviously you have your other son there as well, who's seen what's happened. So once you were told that news, like, what was the next step? Because obviously you got all these emotions going through you and your wife, and then you've got your other son as well. So if you can just describe what happened, because I can't, for me to say what you were feeling just sounds stupid. So what happened next?
Yeah, and there's just an amazing feeling of shock, to be honest, and it did just feel as if the world had ended, and everything stopped. It just felt that everything stopped, and I went to kiss Patrick, and I thought it was, for me, it was just so surreal in that, I'd kissed him goodbye in the morning and said, look, you have a great day, because he had school to get to, and then he was off for his Tottenham adventure, and it just felt, literally 12 or 18 hours earlier, everything was normal, and you in that moment, Chris, everything has changed, and everything has changed forever. But it's just incredibly incomprehensible to deal with. We were surrounded by wonderful NHS professionals who were upset themselves, who could bring us tea and biscuits, but in all reality, not much happens at that point. They didn't know. It's not as if he'd been knocked down by a car or attacked or any of those situations. He had literally collapsed in the street, and to this day we don't have a cause for that, which is, which is in many respects is really, really difficult. So we had nothing to, we almost had nothing to question. We had nobody to blame. Nobody to point fingers at. There weren't, or in normal situations, if we have any sort of accident, then we can sort of sequence of events through and you can work it out, but it was literally unexplainable. So we literally had nothing to stay there for. When you say what happens at that point, and it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and we had to make phone calls as well. So we had our daughter was at uni, had to phone my parents, had to phone her parents, which again, they were the worst calls that anyone could ever have to make. But ultimately, we got some things shoved in a couple of plastic bags and some leaflets, and we had to go home. And that was the brutal reality of the evening. There was no, there wasn't anything that we could stay for. We could have stayed all night and sat with Patrick's body, but at some point we were going to have to leave. So we did, and then quite bizarrely, with the one-way system around Paddington, I couldn't find my way back out in the state of shock I was in as a driver, driving through the remnants of the storm, and I couldn't find my way back onto the A40 and the West Way home. So that was quite it was unbelievable. The streets of West or Central London, the West End, deserted at that time on a Tuesday night, and you're just desperate to get on the A40 and get on the way home. We couldn't find it. Was, sure, it didn't take too long, but it felt like forever.
Yeah. So after it happened in hospital, when did you leave? What time was it roughly about in the morning?
We left probably by 3 a.m. I should think. We were probably there for 2 to 3 hours maximum, which is, spent making those phone calls, drinking tea, talking to professionals, and just being numb. There's not, there wasn't an awful lot that we could do in that situation. So we had to make the decision to just go home and collapse, really.
So, because correct me if I'm wrong, I might have said it in the book, but when that happened, obviously, because it happened was it on a train platform as well?
It wasn't on the train. It was outside the station, so it was sort of 5 minutes away from the station.
Okay, so you had then obviously strangers come in and help as well, and do the best they could for Patrick. I imagine some of them were at the hospital as well, and it must have been, obviously you've lost your son, but they were there as well, and it must, the whole thing must have been just so surreal.
None of. He did receive help. He received CPR from a passerby, which was fantastic. And I think 3 people did stop and try and help and do that. But no, they weren't at the hospital. So I think he was probably, again, he was in a sense, he was lucky in that he collapsed a mile away from the hospital, and the medics were on the scene really, really quickly. But there was nothing that they could do. But when we did get to the hospital, no, it was that was private in terms of there weren't any of the other people around.
So you've driven home, you've left the hospital, you, your wife, your son, left the hospital around about 3. You're driving home. When you got home, was it straight to bed, or was there still this awareness thinking, oh, this hasn't really happened, and you'll wake up and you'll be like a bad nightmare? Or
Well, yeah, there was the 3 of us. We literally collapsed on the sofa together, just as a bundle of shock and misery and disbelief. 3 of us were there. We hoped that the dog might realise what was going on and show some empathy, but there was no. It was the time that she had to earn a corn, and she didn't step up to the plate, unfortunately. But no, we just collapsed for an hour or so, maybe drifted in and out of some sort of sleep. I can't remember, but it would have been absolutely fitful anyway. And then before long, it was sort of 6 or 7 o'clock, and we had to get up and start thinking about the reality of sharing the news with wider family and friends and community. So that was what we were sort of thrust pretty quickly into all of that.
so you had all that to happen, which is in itself is terrible, and I just wouldn't wish anyone not losing their child. But on top of that, you said earlier in the interview about your dad. Now, again, correct me if I'm wrong, from reading the book, he'd been ill for a while. Is that correct? Can you just explain a little bit about that, and then the days after Patrick's death, what was that like, and also how your dad was coping as well?
Yeah, so Dad had been diagnosed with mesothelioma, which is a asbestos-related disease I think it was the end of August previous year. So he was probably 4 months-ish into that. He'd had a couple of rounds of chemotherapy, and he'd not been well certainly over Christmas, which was into January. So he was still struggling with any sort of normality and recovery, and he was clearly ill, clearly really ill. The day after, or later that day, we all went into our doctors, and we had to do something that we had to do with the doctors. And Dad was effectively taken straight into hospital in Oxford. I think they thought with a couple of days they could straighten him out a little bit and just give him a few boosts, and he'd be back with it. But as it turned out, he never came out of hospital. He went downhill really quickly and died a couple of weeks later. So those days for us were a mixture of Kate being pretty heroic from the perspective of dealing with all the post-mortem and all the official things that needed to be done as far as Patrick dying was concerned, whilst I would take my mum backwards and forwards to the hospital in Oxford to visit Dad. So that was again, whilst we're in the midst of grief for Patrick, and quickly we became aware that it wasn't just our grief. It was we live in a relatively small town of 28,000 people, and it was a huge community who were impacted and affected as well. And I think we became aware very, very quickly that it wasn't private. It wasn't a private loss. It was one for the community as well. So we had that to cope with, and at the same time, as I said, it was quite a trek up backwards and forwards to see how Dad was, and he just very, very gently, very surely went downhill, to the point that it was, I think, almost exactly 2 weeks later that he died as well.
Yeah, it's did you and your wife find yourself almost in a trance? Obviously, you're going through this grief. It's terrible and it's awful and it must be heart-wrenching. But because things needed to be done, it was a case of, I don't know if autopilot's the right word, but I hope you understand what I mean. It was a case, okay, we need to get this done. Was it a feeling of that as well, of just trying to get everything done, trying to get through it?
Yeah, and we got support from several places as well, and people would say you won't remember anything of the next 6 months, which felt at the time, it felt quite an odd thing to say because of the ferocity of the emotion that we were feeling with every breath that we were taking. But yeah, I think in such extreme circumstances, there is something pretty basic kicks in that says you've got to breathe, you've got to eat, you've got to sleep. And I think for each of us, we did those things, and we would sit down around the dinner table at the end of the evening and conjure up something that was positive for each of us out of the day. We've got to find something out of this that gives us a purpose and gives us a reason for going on to the next day. So it might be something really, really basic in terms of, well, we're actually here again, we got through the day, or it might have been something a bit more significant. But we did, right from day one, really, we made sure that we helped each other to look for look to reasons to look forward. Otherwise, we would have, I think, just become mired in desperation at the time.
So, in regards to your writing, was one of the ways you coped? Obviously, you weren't thinking about a book then, but was one of the ways you were coping actually just writing down how you felt at that time?
Yeah, and I didn't, and I didn't do it. I didn't do it immediately. That probably came. It probably came a month or two later that I started. I just started to write. And I'm not sure what compelled me to do it, but I do remember the moment. I just felt like I've got to write this. I've got to share this. I've got to do something with it, because I can't do. There's so much I can't do. But what I can do is try to write about it. So yeah, that came over the next couple of months, and I ended up writing an article which was became the basis for a front page in the Swindon Advertiser. So as Swindon fans, that's what they majored on. Which then I think it sort of took off a little bit locally and got published by When Saturday Comes, it's a fantastic football magazine, which I've read for 30 something years myself as well. So I was really proud that they'd recognised that as well. And out of that, the Guardian picked it up as well and shared it, which was, it was, for me, it was recognition that other people appreciated what I'd written in the way that I told the story, really, and that article probably becomes, in many senses, for everything that follows with the book as well, because clearly if I'd not written that bit, then nothing else would have followed either. It's that story, really, of a family and football and the wider sporting community that we enjoyed clearly together. And I wanted to tell those stories so that they're there for me to remember in 20 or 25 years' time, hopefully, when the intensity of that immediate period is perhaps past, and it's something that we can look back on and fondly remember some of the stories and the memories we created together.
Something you mentioned again earlier in the interview where you talked about you weren't the post-mortem and the coroner's report, and the coroner, they said that there was no cause, like they just didn't know what caused it. There was nothing before, there was nothing that led up to this. I think that must have been, again, another hard thing, because there's no rhyme or reason for it. It's just 1 minute again going to football, and then another minute it's just not with us anymore.
Yeah, and you can take there's a couple of different perspectives on that, really, Chris. I mean, in one sense, it was really, really difficult not having any sort of reason, or as I said earlier, anyone to blame, if you like, in a sense, or not knowing. But in another sense, there's that view of, well, nobody could have done anything. There is and from everything that we've understood since, no testing or screening, from what scientifically we know at the moment, it wouldn't have made any difference. It just happened. So in that sense, there isn't anything that anybody could have done any differently. We've been lucky to be supported by some fantastic organisations and charities along the way. SUDC is one, so I think there's a portion of every sale of the book goes to SUDC, which is just sudden and unexplained death in children. And they've taken the crusade to Parliament this year as well. I think for those who remember, really the publicity around cot death probably 20-30 years ago, which primarily around the sudden death of infants. This SUDC, so sudden unexplained death in children, is in many senses is a logical extension of that. The death of sudden death of children, many of whom are sleeping. Patrick was quite rare in the fact that he was actually out and active when it happened. And SUDC have been instrumental in putting together scientists and researchers, and as well as I said, taking the publicity to Parliament, and having it debated in Parliament this year, and through their fantastic work, we know, in terms of how many are impacted by this. But in that year, so in 2020, Patrick was one of 10 children for whom their death remains unexplained. So that is really important, and they're really important to us. And then the other dimension to that is well, what about the rest? What about the rest of us? What about his brother and his sister? What about ourselves as parents as well? What's the likelihood of the same happening to us? So, or future children, grandchildren down the line. So we followed that up with every form of genetic testing that's available to us, and we've gone down those lines. And as yet, absolutely nothing has come to particular light in that respect either. But who knows where science will take us in the coming years. But we would certainly hope that the work that the likes of SUDC, and there are plenty of others out there, are doing will continue to further the case of science and understanding, so that in the same way that cot death was massively reduced over the last 20-30 years, and hopefully the same can be said for slightly older children and young adults too. I mean, it can impact, I think, young adults up to 35 as well. So hopefully progress will take us in that direction.
So when did let's go back a bit, when did the two deaths occur? What month and year did they occur?
It was 2020, and it was January, so they're both in January 2020.
So obviously, the reason I asked that date is because it's significant, because obviously I think it's a month or two later he had the lockdowns. So obviously there's now restrictions in regards, was there restrictions at the funeral in regards to family members, not just going to the funeral, but also coming to see you at the house from a legal perspective? Is that correct?
Yeah, not at the time. We were, in that respect, we were some of the lucky ones in that we were all fully open, I think, until about mid-March, wasn't it? So in terms of our funerals, memorial services, that they were able to continue as usual. And my mum's sister died as well in the same month or just after. So my mum had lost a grandchild, a husband, and a sister within the space of a month. So we got through all of those then lockdowns kicked in. So we'd had a couple of months actually of almost a whirlwind and never-ending stream of visitors to the house, and get quite used to that. And suddenly, that was absolutely cut short, because we went straight into the depths of that first lockdown, when it was certainly very, very restricted. So yeah, that was quite a change, and that in itself was quite difficult to cope with, because we were cut off from some of those support mechanisms that we needed and we were starting to rely on at the time.
Yeah, and this is another significant part for me in the book, because you and your wife joined some support group on Zoom of people who had been through that as well. Can you just talk, because obviously you normally be in person, but because of lockdown you weren't able to. So can you just talk us through that and how that helped you?
Yeah, so one of the wonderful charities that support us is Helen and Douglas House, who support families of terminally ill children in Oxfordshire, and they provided a support worker who was really Kate's guardian angel for quite some time. And they did all the socially distant support things, and out of that we did join a group with other unfortunately bereaved parents, from parents of effectively a baby or two and younger children. Patrick was the oldest of the group that we were in, but they were people who were going through what we were going through. Normally, yeah, it would have been a meeting in a room once a month or so, but we had to do that virtually. And the same way with everybody else, you get used to doing things in slightly different ways, don't you? So that was a really helpful group for us to actually be able to feel the support, and I think the understanding of others who were going through something that we were facing too. So that provided some really tough moments, sharing each other's stories and listening to each other, but some really tender and supportive friendships as well have emerged out of it that have continued, because some of the bonds that get created in those situations are pretty significant.
Yeah, I can imagine. Didn't you go back to Ireland as well after, or all of that was all that sort of like the funerals and whatnot? Didn't you go back to Ireland as well to visit family and be with them as well? Or have I got that completely wrong?
I've been back to Ireland. I'd have to check on some of the timelines on that, Chris. But probably later on in the story, because we weren't able to travel, were we, for quite some time after that. So I can't remember actually when I did first go back, but that was difficult, because we'd had so many special family times there as well, and whenever you do something for the first time, it might be going to the local supermarket for the first time is difficult, or going back to running club for the first time is difficult. When you do something quite monumental in terms of travel and going back to some really, really special places and seeing some people that you've not seen for a couple of years, that was really, really, yeah, it was really difficult. But equally, there's a lot to take out of feeling the love and the warmth of those that we met along the way as well.
Yeah, indeed. So how are you and your family now? Some distance, obviously something that obviously is going to linger, but how are you now, like you and your family, in regards to what happened? Have you used it as a way to help, I don't know, raise awareness of this, like sudden death syndrome, like basically how are you and your family?
Yeah, I think we've through the journeys that we've been on, we've tried to do positive things, and Kate in particular has been fantastic. She runs a pop-up grief cafe in the local area as well, for others in the situation, so that we can start to give back as well to those around us. For my part, writing the book was a huge challenge, and also a real sense of achievement when that was completed. Likewise, I've run my first marathon as well along the way, which was a big step for me. How we are now, I think we understand that it's not something that you get through or get over. It's with us for, I think it's with us for it's with us for life, in the sense that I think that's the way that grief works. That when we've got special people in our lives, they don't leave us in that way. We don't move on from them. We just learn to accommodate living without them. And one of the analogies that's been given and shared to us is, if you start off with that day one, that raw feeling when we crumpled on the sofa, and you imagine a jar with a series of pebbles in it. There is nothing else in the jar other than those pebbles or marbles rattling around. Over time, you end up putting more things in the jar that can exist around the marbles. It doesn't mean that they're not there anymore. It just means that you've got more things to focus on and do, and again to provide hopefully some reason and purpose in what we go on to do as well. So yeah, I don't think there's any sense or expectation of getting over it or getting through it. I think it's a case of how we live with it for the rest of our years, to be honest.
As I've said throughout the interview, this book is a very sobering read, but it's also a celebratory read as well. And yeah, there were moments I admit where I had to stop and pause for a minute, but it's brilliantly written. I mean, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast and talk about it. What I will do is I will leave a link in the description below of where you can buy the book, and also the charity you discussed.
Oh, fantastic, yeah.
So I will do that. But Liam Walsh, thank you very much for being on the 286 project. It's been a real pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, Chris, and a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for your support along the way too.
You're welcome. All right,
thank you.